the leader of the Third Reich, notorious for his role in World War II and the deaths of millions, epitomized an ideology of racial supremacy and aggressive territorial expansion, leading to a devastating period of war and genocide. Stalin, the authoritarian leader of the Soviet Union, was known for his policies that caused widespread repression, famine, and the establishment of labor camps. In the People's Republic of China, its founding leader, Chairman Mao, oversaw the Great Leap Forward and the Cultural Revolution, events that caused significant social turmoil and numerous deaths. The head of the Khmer Rouge in Cambodia, Pol Pot, was responsible for one of the 20th century's most horrific genocides, driven by the aim to establish an agrarian communist society. It's crucial to note, however, that the panorama of 20th century dictatorships extends beyond these infamous names. Join us in today's episode of the Forgotten Dictators of the 20th Century as we explore the complex and often harrowing stories of some of history's neglected figures. General Ne Win, a pivotal figure in Myanmar's modern history, ruled the country from 1962 until his resignation in 1988. His tenure was marked by a mix of harsh authoritarian rule and policies deeply influenced by his personal beliefs, including a notable reliance on astrology. Born with the name Shu Maung in 1911, his early life was shaped by the turbulent political landscape of colonial Burma. He rose through the military ranks and was instrumental in Burma's struggle for independence from British rule. Maung changed his name to Ne Win, meaning Radiant Sun, during his ascent to power, before implementing a coup d'etat in 1962. Ne Win then established a military government advised deeply by superstition, effectively ending the country's brief experiment with democracy. Ne Win's rule was characterized by the so-called Burmese way to socialism, a political and economic ideology that mixed elements of Buddhism, socialism, and traditional Burmese values. This approach led to the nationalization of major industries and a shift towards isolationism, which gradually crippled the country's economy and left it one of the poorest in the world. Among Ne Win's most notable eccentricities was his deep belief in astrology and numerology. Reportedly, he could often be seen in poor districts at night, dressed as a king, and walking backwards over bridges, apparently believing this would bring good luck to his country. It is recounted that when a fortune teller cautioned Ne Win about the potential threat of assassination, he had a peculiar ritual of standing before a mirror and firing at his own reflection with a revolver. Similarly, when forewarned of impending violence, he was advised to act out the scene by stepping on dog entrails or immersing his feet in a bowl filled with pig's blood in front of the mirror. When Ne Win travelled throughout Burma, he ordered the execution of all stray dogs in the vicinity before his arrival. This practice stemmed from his soothsayer's advice to avoid dogs, particularly those with crooked tails. Among the most outlandish and macabre tales associated with the dictator is the belief that he bathed in dolphin blood, convinced that it would preserve his youth. These beliefs manifested in many of his policy decisions, most infamously in the 1987 demonetization of the Burmese currency. Believing the number 9 to be auspicious, he introduced banknotes in denominations of 45 and 90, rendering previous denominations invalid. This decision wreaked havoc on the economy, wiping out the savings of countless Burmese citizens and leading to widespread economic and social distress. Another notable decision reportedly derived from his superstitious beliefs was Burma's sudden switch from driving on the right to driving on the left. This was done practically overnight, causing widespread chaos and confusion. A popular urban myth claims that Ne Win made this decision based on an astrologer's advice that a switch to driving on the right would bring good luck and stop the country becoming too politically left-wing, although how true this really is remains unknown. Ne Win's regime was also marked by authoritarianism and a suppression of dissent. Political opposition was not tolerated, and the government was known for its harsh crackdowns on any form of protest or dissent. The most tragic of these was the brutal suppression of the widespread pro-democracy protests in 1988, which resulted in thousands of deaths and led to international condemnation. Ne Win's resignation in the same year did not immediately lead to a transition to democratic rule. Instead, it precipitated further military control and continued political turmoil. The impact of his rule remains deeply embedded in Myanmar's political and economic landscape, with the country still grappling with the legacy of military dominance, policies based on superstition, and the struggle for democratic governance. Saparmurat Niyazov is often remembered as one of the most eccentric dictators in recent history. He led Turkmenistan from its independence in 1991 until his death in 2006. His rule was characterized by an extravagant cult of personality, bizarre decrees, and an iron grip on power that left an indelible mark on the Central Asian nation. Rising through the ranks of the Communist Party, he became the first secretary of the Turkmen SSR in 1985. With the dissolution of the Soviet Union, Niyazov declared Turkmenistan's independence and assumed the presidency. Niyazov's rule was also characterized by a series of bizarre and often capricious decrees. Some of these were more harmless, such as his implementation of the national holiday, Melon Day, his favorite food. He also renamed cities and the names of the months after himself and his family members, and even the word for bread was replaced with his mother's maiden name. Additionally, he banned opera and ballet, considering them unnecessary. Beards and gold teeth were frowned upon, and he even made suggestions that people should chew bones for dental health. He also implemented laws outlawing dogs in the capital, lip-syncing in concerts, and the mere mention of contagious diseases. His image was omnipresent, gracing currency and dominating public spaces. Perhaps most famously, he authored the Runama, or Book of the Soul, a spiritual guide which he mandated to be studied and revered alongside religious texts, effectively intertwining his personal philosophy with the state's ideology. Underneath the eccentric facade, however, was a regime that was brutally repressive. Niyazov's government maintained strict control over all aspects of life in Turkmenistan. The media was heavily censored, with every broadcast beginning with a pledge stating that the broadcaster's tongue would shrivel if they slandered the name of the president. Perhaps unsurprisingly, political opposition was virtually non-existent, and human rights were severely curtailed. The state apparatus was used to quash dissent and maintain Niyazov's hold on power. Economically, Niyazov's tenure saw a mismanagement of Turkmenistan's vast natural gas resources. While the country was potentially wealthy, the profits were largely funneled into grandiose projects, like the construction of massive palaces such as the Palace of Ice in the desert, and monuments, rather than improving the lives of ordinary citizens. This misallocation of resources contributed to widespread poverty and underdevelopment. The death of Niyazov in 2006 marked the end of an era for Turkmenistan. His legacy remains a complex blend of absurdity and tyranny, a reminder of the often surreal nature of absolute power. Mobutu Sese Seko, a figure synonymous with dictatorial excess and kleptocracy, ruled Zaire from 1965 until 1997. Rising to prominence in the chaotic aftermath of the Congo's independence in 1960, Mobutu, initially as army chief of staff, capitalized on the political instability. He seized power in a coup in 1965, after a brief period in which he had been sidelined from power, and began establishing his long-lasting rule. Mobutu's eccentricities were as grandiose as they were symbolic. He changed his name to Mobutu Sese Seko Kukung Bendu Wadzabanga, which roughly translates to the all-powerful warrior who, because of his endurance and inflexible will to win, goes from conquest to conquest, leaving fire in his wake. He also renamed the country Zaire in 1971 as part of his authenticity policy, an effort to rid the country of colonial influences and to foster a unique Zairean identity. Under this policy, Mobutu also encouraged the abandonment of Western names and dress. He himself often appeared in a leopard skin hat and abacost, a Mao-style tunic, which became a symbol of his rule. His face and name were ubiquitous, appearing in everything from the currency to the names of cities. The cult of personality around Mobutu was matched by the repressiveness of his regime. Political opposition was ruthlessly suppressed, and state resources were used to maintain his grip on power. Mobutu's government was notorious for human rights abuses, including torture, disappearances, and the silencing of the press. Economically, Mobutu's rule was marked by staggering corruption and mismanagement. He amassed an enormous personal fortune, estimated to be in the billions, through embezzlement and exploiting the country's vast mineral wealth. This kleptocracy came at a high cost to Zaire's development. Despite its natural resources, the nation suffered from extensive poverty, crumbling infrastructure, and a lack of basic services. Mobutu's foreign policy was characterized by a complex relationship with the West, particularly the United States. During the Cold War, he was viewed as a key anti-communist ally in Africa, which led to substantial foreign aid and political support, despite his regime's notorious corruption and human rights record. The end of Mobutu's rule came amidst the backdrop of the First Congo War. In 1997, rebel forces, aided by Rwanda and Uganda, advanced on Kinshasa, forcing Mobutu into exile. Already suffering with cancer, Mobutu died a few months later in Morocco. Jean-Bédel Bokassa, an emblematic figure in African political history, was born on February 22, 1921, in Bobangui, located within the precincts of Moyenne Congo in French Equatorial Africa, now part of the Central African Republic. Bokassa's trajectory from a military leader to political figure encapsulates a complex narrative of power dynamics in post-colonial Africa. Bokassa's early life was rooted in local structures of authority. He was the progeny of a village chieftain. Enlisting in the French army in 1939, he displayed remarkable prowess and ascended to the rank of captain, particularly distinguishing himself during the French conflict in Indochina. In a significant career shift in 1961, influenced by President David Dacko, Bokassa left the French armed forces to assume command of the army in the nascent Central African Republic, a state freshly extricated from colonial shackles. The watershed moment in Bokassa's political ascent occurred on December 31, 1965, when he utilized his military acumen to overthrow President Dacko. The subsequent day, he declared himself president of the Republic, marking the inception of a transformative era in the Central African Republic's political landscape. As Bokassa's regime evolved, it increasingly exhibited signs of autocratic governance and capricious policymaking. In a dramatic consolidation of power, Bokassa augmented his presidential authority through periodic administrative reshuffles. December 1976 marked a pivotal moment in Bokassa's rule. He adopted the imperial title Emperor Bokassa and renamed the country the Central African Empire. His coronation in 1977, a grandiose emulation of his idol Napoleon, was an extravagance that inflicted severe financial strain on his economically beleaguered nation. Bokassa's imperial tenure was marred by egregious human rights violations, most notably his alleged involvement in the massacre of 100 schoolchildren by his imperial guard. This act precipitated international condemnation and eventually led to his ousting by French paratroops in September 1979, an intervention that reinstated the Republic and returned Dacko to the presidency. Post-coup, Bokassa lived in exile, initially in Côte d'Ivoire and later in France. In 1980, Bokassa was sentenced in absentia to death. Despite this, he made the perplexing decision to return to the Central African Republic in 1986, where he faced arrest and a subsequent trial. In 1987, he was convicted of the schoolchildren murders, among other crimes, although acquitted of cannibalism charges. His death sentence was later commuted, and he was released in 1993. In a posthumous reconciliation gesture, Bokassa was pardoned in 2010 during the country's 50th anniversary celebrations. The reign of Mengistu Haile Mariam in Ethiopia, spanning from 1977 to 1991, represents a deeply tumultuous and violent chapter in the nation's history. Mengistu's ascent to power followed the 1974 overthrow of Emperor Haile Selassie by a coalition of opposition groups, predominantly from the political left. This transition marked the end of the monarchy and the beginning of a ruthless campaign to consolidate military power and eliminate political adversaries. Central to Mengistu's regime was the infamous Red Terror campaign, a period of intense state-sponsored violence primarily targeting members of the Ethiopian People's Revolutionary Party, EPRP. This campaign, while a reaction to provocations from the EPRP, including urban terrorism and assassination attempts, was marked by disproportionate and preemptive state violence that far exceeded the acts of the opposition. In 1978, after repelling a Somali invasion in the south, the government intensified its focus on crushing the northern insurgency, employing brutal counterinsurgency tactics, including rape and arbitrary imprisonment. A particularly heinous aspect of Mengistu's reign was the utilization of famine as a tool of control and repression. The famines of 1983 to 1985, exacerbated by government policies, were instrumentalized as part of the counterinsurgency strategy, with forced resettlement being a key component. This policy led to massive fatalities, with death rates during resettlement being 6 times the normal rate. Estimates of the fatalities during this period vary, but a conservative figure stands at a minimum of 60,000 deaths from 1974 to 1985, combining 10 to 20,000 killed during the Red Terror and an additional 50,000 from forced resettlement. However, broader estimates suggest that up to 350,000 people died in the famine, with a significant proportion attributable to government policies. Mengistu's regime eventually crumbled, culminating in his flight to Zimbabwe in May 1991, where he continues to reside despite being found guilty of genocide in absentia. From the ruthless regimes of Bokassa and Mengistu in Africa to the authoritarian leaders of Asia, this episode has delved into the legacies of power, oppression, and the human cost of their rule. Stay tuned for more explorations into history's most controversial figures. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and share your thoughts in the comments below.